Hello, and thank you so much for joining us today. Episode of Pivot Point, the show where we discuss insights, strategies, and industry trends that encourage growth for your business. My name is David Slepak. I'm the Chief Marketing Officer here at StenTam and the host of today's show. I'm joined by Brian Raboin, who will be explaining a newly introduced investment opportunity that could help your business reduce its tax liabilities. Before we get started, please subscribe to Pivot Point so you won't miss an episode, and follow us on social media to get more insights on how we can help your small and mid-size organization. Brian, thank you so much for joining us today. I'm super excited to take a deep dive into the Inflation Reduction Act and some of the clean energy tax credits that are associated with it.
All right. Thanks for having me, David.
Awesome. So let's get right into it and get a little into this Inflation Reduction Act. Tell me a little bit about how this was introduced and a high-level overview of the opportunities laid out in this piece of legislation.
Sure. Be happy to. So, Inflation Reduction Act, signed about a year ago, came into effect January 1st of this year. Large bill, one of the largest bills ever passed by Congress, but inside of it, they have a provision for clean energy tax credits. And the idea there is they're making clean energy tax credits transferable. Now, clean energy tax credits have been around for years, since the early 2000s. However, they've been really gate-kept to really large projects and also to really large investors. And the reason being is that the transferability of the tax credit just didn't exist. So the way that it would work is a developer would develop a solar project. And the IRS rules were that a percentage of the value of that solar project could be a tax credit to the owner of that project. Now, when you develop a solar project, you usually don't have taxable income in the first several years. So that was a tax credit that really couldn't be used by the true owners, the developers of the solar project. So to take advantage of the tax credits, they would do what was called partnership flips. Primarily, 80% of these tax equity investments into renewable energy were done by partnership flips. What would happen is you would get a tax equity investor. They would come in onto the project with you. They would own 99% of the project. And in exchange for owning 99% of the project and putting money into the project, they would be able to take advantage of the credit that the government was offering, as well as the depreciation of that. It's a very complex structure, as you can imagine. Sounds confusing. I'm sure everybody listening right now is saying, what are they talking about? And almost by design, right? So it was 50% of these were done by JP Morgan and Bank of America, all the way up to COVID. It was really for just large projects, and it was really hard for any type of small developer to take advantage of these tax credits. IRA, with provision of transferability, has addressed that. So now what can happen is, instead of having to go into these partnership structures and having a lot of lawyers work on contracts and having all these insurance vehicles and a whole bunch of complexity, the credit can now just be created, basically, when a project gets to a certain point, through a very simple process that the IRS is rolling out. You can transfer that tax credit to another entity that has tax liability, typically a C Corp that has taxable income, and just through the transferability, it becomes a transaction as opposed to a partnership. And so that's the big unlock, right? So now more developers can take advantage of this, more investors can take advantage of it, and it simplifies the entire process from start to end.
And it seems like kind of the simplification of this process not only kind of brings it, I'll say, down market to smaller, mid, and smaller organizations, but also really kind of amps up the opportunity to generate more projects.
100%, right? And that's exactly what the government is wanting to do. So the administration has a goal to increase renewable energy production inside the United States. We all know that green energy is paramount to the success and the longevity of us on the planet, reducing greenhouse gases. And frankly, the United States, in spite of its best efforts, hasn't always been on the vanguard of developing renewable energy projects. This has completely flipped this, right? So just the passing of the IRA has sparked a ton of interest and a ton of activity inside of renewable energy. A report I just heard out just yesterday, as a matter of fact, there's been more than a 33% increase in manufacturing facilities here in the United States to develop things like solar panels and inverters and converters and things of that nature to support renewable energy. There's been more than a 50% increase of consumers purchasing green energy type products, be it electric cars or solar panels or battery backups. So just the passing of the IRA has been a catalyst to really jumpstart America's call it an energy revolution towards renewable energies.
It makes a lot of sense. In the past, I've had solar panels, on my home, right? How does that work? Like you say developers, right? Large projects, small projects. Can you give everyone kind of a scope as to the producer side of what do those projects look like? Is it the solar panels on my house? Is it those solar farms that I see on the way to San Diego, right? Like what's the deal?
Yeah, it's all of the above, right? So inside the IRA, and not to get too wonky, but there's an IRS code 6418 that lists out the types of credits that are transferable, of which there's 11 types of credits that are transferable. Inside that, it includes obviously solar, it includes wind, it includes hydro, it even includes nuclear, it includes battery storage, it includes electric vehicles, it includes alternative fuel, and capturing carbon. Tough word for me to say sometimes. Now, to kind of bring it down to, well, that sounds like a lot. What's that mean to me? We'll kind of give a very simple example, right? So if a developer of, say, residential solar provides solar infrastructure, solar panels to homeowners, there's typically two ways that homeowners purchase that. They can purchase the project outright, so they own the panels on top of their house, or they can lease those, right? In the event of a lease, whoever is the actual owner of the panels is actually the person that typically provides the lease. So the credit for those solar panels actually goes to the leaseor. And from there, then the credit becomes transferable, and they can sell that credit to somebody, a C Corp, that has taxable income. Now, one house isn't really going to move the needle from a tax perspective, right? So what developers are looking at doing is they aggregate up 1,000 houses, for example, and the total number of those tax credits on 1,000 houses becomes very meaningful, and then a buyer of credits can look at that total aggregation and purchase that. Now, that is a very interesting way of kind of looking at that, and I know a lot of developers are looking at that. The more traditional way is what's called commercial and industrial solar, or utility solar. So imagine a large solar farm that plugs into your utility. That would be a utility solar project. Those are typically the ones that have been gate-kept before the IRA. The commercial and industrial ones are the really interesting ones. So those would be your supermarket and your covered parking has solar panels on it, or your kid's school has solar panels on top of the roof. Well, those type of projects, typically those tax credits sometimes went unused. Well, now, say a school or the supermarket or a landlord that has put solar panels on their property, they now have a credit that they can either use for themselves, or if they don't have the taxable income to use that tax credit, they can sell that tax credit to somebody else.
And being here in Arizona, you can imagine I'm seeing these pop up everywhere. Covered parking is really cool, and then the added benefit of solar on top of it seems like that would be a no-brainer.
Yeah,
right?
Really cool, no pun intended. Right?
Super cool, actually. So we talked a little bit about we'll call it supply side, if you will, right? Mm-hmm. The producers. Tell us a little bit more about kind of the demand side or the purchasing side. I'm a business owner. Perhaps I've made some money or have significant taxable income. How does that work?
Yeah, so the buy side is interesting, and so while the IRA has a lot of great things in there and is very revolutionary or transformative inside the energy industry from a developer standpoint, the buyer side still has to abide by what calls the passive income rules of the IRS. So what that means is the tax credit itself by designation is a passive loss. Now, by IRS rules, a passive loss can only be applied to passive income. So it's very important that if you're looking at this, you understand that those tax rules. If you have passive income that is taxable, then yes, you most likely are able to purchase these credits and apply the passive loss of the credit to your passive income. Typically, the qualifying entities are widely held C Corps. So publicly traded companies, any type of C Corp designation that is held by more than 5 people, more than 50% held by 5 people, would be qualified entities for this tax credit.
And I'm assuming when you're buying something, there's some upside, right? So, what are the economics that are kind of associated with this type of purchase?
Yeah, and this part's as complex as everything sounds. This part's really easy. This is the simple part, right? So you basically pay a percentage per dollar of tax credit. So if a developer, just for the sake of the example, has a $100 tax credit, and you've got a $100 tax liability, well, the developer says, I've got a tax credit that I can sell you, and you say, well, I'd like to buy it, and the developer says, how much do you want to give me for it? And I'll say, I'll give you $85 for this, and they'll say sold, and they'll do the transfer with the IRS forms, and then you have in your hand basically a form that says you have paid or have the right to a $100 tax credit that can then take care of your $100 tax bill. Obviously, it's not as simple as that, but you kind of get the idea.
Sure.
So the larger the credit, typically the closer to 100% it's going to get. In the pre-IRA world, typically things would go for in the high 90s. Sometimes they'd even go over 100% because they're getting the depreciation. In the transferability world, we're seeing that drop, right? You've lost the depreciation, so it's obviously have to be below 100%. So what we're seeing out there in the market is we're seeing things start to transact about from mid-80s to low to mid-90s% on the dollar.
Interesting. So, I mean, it seems like there's a really cool marriage that can take place between bringing producers of tax credits, right, and sellers with buyers that are very interested in leveraging these and kind of in this new market of transferability, right? So, tell us a little bit about kind of what you're seeing, or are there emerging technologies or things that kind of help facilitate that?
Yeah, so there's obviously needs to be some type of conduit between these buyers and sellers. So developers are really good at developing solar projects, right? That's where they spent their life work. That's where their expertise is, but their expertise isn't necessarily in the marketing and selling of tax credits. And frankly, hardly anybody is, because it's been so kind of controlled by such a small group for a long time. As a result of this, there's a whole lot of new activity coming out to try to figure out how to connect these two entities. So, and there's really some great innovative technologies and great innovative ideas and companies that are coming out to help out with this. Some of them are coming from all different walks of life. Some people are coming from the industry itself, from the renewable energy industry itself. Some are coming from Wall Street. And then there's us coming from people who have done tax credits before, and they're all kind of converging into this new marketplace. The most common model that we're seeing is a two-sided marketplace. So the idea is that developers would be able to list their credits into an open marketplace, and buyers can browse these credits, and then through a technology platform, they get connected. What happens in that technology platform, I think, is where the magic is going to happen and where the innovation is going to happen, and we're still waiting to see exactly how the market's going to form and what innovations really capture the market's attention, and that's really, I think, where the excitement is going to be in the next several years.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. What are some of the challenges that you see either on the buyer side or the seller side that people need to be thinking about?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the sell side challenges typically are still the same challenges they had underneath the old model, but now developers that haven't been in this market are going to have to learn what these are. So there's still going to be large due diligence components. There's what's called a recapture period. So the credit can be recaptured within a 5-year period if certain circumstances are not maintained. For example, obviously the property has to continue to produce energy for 5 years. Otherwise, the credit can be null and void. So that is a challenge. right? So making sure that developers are able to put together the due diligence documentation and the track record of success to make sure that a buyer is comfortable in avoiding any type of recapture risk or minimizing it as much as possible, to the point of the seller providing guarantees and potentially insurance vehicles to protect the buyer in that case. On the buyer side, it's the same type of thing, right? So your risk is entirely on you. By the IRS rules, if there is a recapture, that recapture risk falls to the buyer, not to the seller. So if you've bought a credit for, say, $1 million, and 2 years into it, there's a recapture event, well, you're going to owe the IRS money for a tax bill that you feel like you've already paid because you gave a good part of that money to the developer of a credit. So on that side, too, you want to make sure that what you're purchasing is going to be able to basically hold up to any type of scrutiny as well as any type of recapture risk that you see in there. And there's things you can do to protect yourself with that, but every time you spend money on it, you're obviously eroding into the value of the credit itself.
Sure.
So making sure that you're also working with a broker or a technology or a partner that does all the due diligence for you, that you can be comfortable with what the work that they're doing, and then working with developers that have a long historic track record of success.
Sure. And, I think everyone's motivated, right, we're doing good things for the environment. We're hedging against carbon emissions and all the other things that come along with solar and wind and some of these other renewable energy sources. Any other kind of parting thoughts that you'd like to share with our audience of business owners and that would be impactful? I mean, what are some of the next steps or things that they could be doing to, further their investigation into this new kind of emerging market, really?
Yeah. So I'd love to tell everybody to go out there and read IRC 6418 and be familiar with it, but no one's going to go and do that. So what I would suggest is if you're a developer, then this is obviously something that's going to be on the forefront. So if you're a developer of renewable technology in any capacity whatsoever, and you're not familiar with this, contact someone who is so they can walk you through it and partner up with an expert that can kind of guide you in it. This is a changing landscape. The IRS is giving guidance out on a monthly, if not weekly basis about how this works. So get yourself a partner that can help keep abreast of what's going on from an IRA perspective and transferability, and tell you how you can take best advantage of that. On the buy side, definitely do the same as well, right? Talk to your CPA, talk to your tax professional, ask them what they know about the IRA. If they're not familiar with it, you can come to us. We'll happily give you we have a buyer's guide. We have an ebook that you can download that explains the mechanics and how all of this works. Constantly being updated as we get more information from the IRS and more information from the market in general. We're always updating our content to be able to provide at no cost to buyers whatsoever.
Makes a lot of sense. Well, Brian, thank you again for coming on the show this today and helping kind of explain some of this really cool emerging stuff in the marketplace and something that's good for the environment too, right? I think that's cool. Again, thank you so much for joining us, and stay tuned for next week's version of Pivot Point.